Okay. Let's see who's joining us here. Me, Luke, Jamie, whoever is that. I think I know who that. Okay. You guys recognize her? Yeah. All right, so okay. Almost ready to start here. Okay. All right. So I didn't give you a whole lot of homework for today, but it was kind of an important thing. And I asked you to kind of come up with ideas for a paper. And then I thought, you know, it might be good to let you know what the requirements for that paper are. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and show you where you can find that. I don't need to do that. So for the people at home, give me a few seconds to open this up and then I'll share the screen. But all I am doing is going to the Canvas site. No. Got it. There we go. Scientific controversies. And then okay, so hopefully at home you can see where I am. Right now I'm going to look at the alternative requirements for a major paper. There's also an alternative major project requirements. I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But hopefully this is going to open. And then you'll be able to see it. Now, can the people at home, do you see the requirements for major paper for scientific controversies? Is that showing up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So, again, I'm not going to just read this through you, but I did want you to let you know where that is. And let me do this so I can talk a little easier. Okay. So it says, well, I'm going to read the first couple sentences. This paper will be about a scientific controversy. In order to be classified as a scientific controversy, you will need to be able to find information for both sides of the argument. Okay, so Galileo's support of the heliocentric model of the solar system would be acceptable, except for the fact that I'm going to spend 2 weeks covering that because of some things. Now, they don't have to be evenly based, but I want you to be able to find scientific information for both sides, okay? Now, you might find that you have chosen a topic where only one side has scientific information available, okay? At that point, you need to decide, is this really what I want to write a paper about if part of what I'm grading on is being able to find sources for both sides? So instead of, here, it's the beginning of the semester, here's a paper, it's due at the end of the semester, good luck, you're going to have stages for this, okay? So the first assignment that's going to be due is a proposal for the topic. Now, that due date isn't really close, but I wanted to talk about it early enough to where you could actually get an idea and maybe share some ideas with other people. I have had people work together on papers of similar topics. For example, I had two people do vaccines, and one person did the vaccine autism relationship, and another person did the, there were like actually four who did this, but there were other aspects of requirements, what vaccines should be required, should we require a whole slew of vaccines at age 1, or is it possible that we have so many vaccines that we're actually not giving immunity? That was one of the paper. I'll share about that one later in the semester. But if anybody wants to do 2 of those and like coordinate with each other and coordinate a presentation, that's fine. It takes more work to do that. Okay. It's actually less work to do your own paper and to work by yourself. But there are some people who we really think we can do a good job on this and have spent time on it. Most of the time when people do that, they end up using that for the Scholars Day project, which has happened. So that's also a possibility from this presentation in the course. So if you're hunting for something to do a Scholars Day project, be aware that I'll probably be a little bit more rigorous in the suggestions that I have for you. Partially because you're meeting a second requirement for that. Okay, let's see. So what are you going to have to do for your paper? You have to be able to describe both sides. You have to be able to give the scientific evidence that both sides have. And it could be historical ones that's already solved, not a problem. Sometimes those are really fun. Okay. And then finally, I expect you to tell me what the current scientific community says about it. Notice I didn't say what science says about it. Okay. Now for Galileo, I think you would agree that the scientific community today will pretty much tell you, yes, we think the sun is the center of the solar system. So that would be a really short section for that one. But when you're talking about how many vaccines should be required, you will find a huge range of ideas on that one. So there's quite a range of possibilities for that particular section. And finally, I want you to tell me where your stand is on it. And again, for some historical ones, that may be real easy. But for a current one, I would like to know where you stand on this and why. What scientific evidence has spurred you to this particular decision? Okay. Now, I will expect a bibliography for the paper. In the past, I have had a librarian come in and talk to people, but I always leave that to the class. Jeanette Parker is really good at helping people find things and find things on ideas. And I've been teaching this class for several semesters. So if you're doing a topic somebody's done before, she may have some stuff. I actually should have her put together a LibGuide for this class, except I wanted you guys to do more work and find some stuff yourself. So would it be worth having her come into the class? Yes, no? Okay. So I will see if I can schedule that so she can come in. It's also going to be interesting. So here is a class on scientific controversies, and I'm bringing in a librarian. Does that say anything about the class? Okay. Now, the other thing I do want to say is there is an alternative paper, and that is doing a lesson plan. And if you're going into education, this might be worthwhile for you. But there's going to be enough requirements that this isn't just, oh, let me throw together a lesson plan. Because I will expect you to get into the framework document and explain how it applies to the standards you're going to be teaching you guys don't know what I'm talking about yet if you're going into education. Because we haven't read the framework document, but I'll talk about that one later. If you're interested in that option, you can do that. If you're not going into education and you want to do a lesson plan, you are welcome to do that. Just be aware that I will expect you to follow all of the requirements of a proper lesson plan that a beginning teacher would be expected to submit to the building administration as evidence that you're prepared to teach. If that sounds scary, realize that education has a little bit more to it than some people think. Okay, all right. So that's the requirements for it. At the moment, it's kind of general. If you're wondering, do I have a set length for the paper? Yes, there is a maximum length of 14 pages. There is no set minimum length, but I expect around 8 pages. Now, if you get all of that information, you explain both sides, you explain the scientific background for each side, you give the current scientific research for that, you give your side for it, or you give, you know, the scientific community's views on it or view on it, and it might be one, it might be many, and what your view is on it, you're going to be pretty close to 8 pages there, or you haven't done a good job with it. But again, if you end up with 7 pages and you're like, I could put more stuff in there, but it would be fluff, I'm okay with you stopping at that. If it's 3 pages, I will tell you right now, I will really doubt that your research is complete. Now, even more, when you do your proposal, I'm going to expect you to have done some research on it. I expect, because there's going to be 2 sides to this controversy, right? Now, I expect you to have resources, 2 resources, and these need to be credible resources. Is Wikipedia a credible resource? It's not? Why not?
Because pretty much anybody can go in and change the information on it.
Oh. What is Wikipedia nice for?
Information, or you take you to other sources.
Yeah. A good Wikipedia page is going to have probably, 15, 20 sources on there. That's, okay, it's not a bad place to start looking for information. It's bad if that's the only thing you do, but you have some idea of how that's going to work. Okay, so now I know you're thinking, but what if I have this one source that explains both sides and their view on that? You can use that for one of the sources for each of the 2 sides. But you remember, I need 2 sources for each side of the argument. And that's going to be in your proposal. So you're going to have to spend a little time doing research. Now, you got a month to do this. So this isn't something that you have to have done like by Wednesday. You've got some time to think on it. But I do want to have some people share, because I asked you to do this on Friday, share some ideas of possible topics that you've thought about. So, yes.
Whether the masks work for coronavirus or not.
Whether masks work for coronavirus or not.
There's a lot of different, scientific experiments and discussions and all this stuff for both sides. So I think that there's plenty of resources out on that, and it's kind of unresolved right now. So
that would be an awesome topic to do. It will be interesting. One of the problems that you're going to find is finding peer-reviewed research, but I think you can do it. Mm-hmm. I think it's a topic that is important enough that we can do that. That would be interesting. What other ideas do we have?
The Scopes monkey trial.
Ooh, the Scopes monkey trial. Why is that important?
It gave way to giving teachers the ability to teach evolution within the classroom.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that. I'll just come back to it. Yes.
I was gonna do like GMOs in the first stage.
Yes, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen so that people can see what I have on the board. Okay. GMOs, what about GMOs?
Like your first stage, there's a lot of debate about that.
Okay, we're even gonna play a game on that one. And you're still welcome to do a paper on that because we're gonna focus our game on information available in 2003. And it's 2020, that's like 17 years of additional research. So that would be actually a really good follow-up. That's cool. What other ideas do we have?
Gravitational singularity.
Gravitational singularity.
Does it exist?
Does it exist? I don't know about that. But that's definitely a good debate. Yes.
Should we be able to build animals that already existed, that are extinct?
Ooh. Okay, so there's two parts of that. Should we be able to, as in, is it possible to do it? Or is it ethical to do it?
I think I'm going with the more ethical standpoint, but I think I'm going to touch on both.
Okay, that's actually really interesting. You're going to have to do a fair amount of digging to find credible sources, but once you come up with them, I think you'll find that's an easy paper to write. And it'll be interesting. You guys all are interested in that, right? But don't want to be the one to actually do the research. This is where at the end of the semester, you're sharing a report on your research and your paper with the rest of the class. I will give you guidelines for that later on. But I just don't want you to do this for yourself. You're going to present this to the class. What other ideas do we have? Sister?
Use of stem cells.
Use of stem cells. Can you narrow that down a little bit?
Embryonic versus adult.
Ah, okay. That's really good. Mia? Gene editing and genetic engineering. That is, okay. So you probably know that's a pretty broad topic.
I was more going for like a particular issue with, I'm not gonna try and pronounce his name, but like how the Chinese scientists, the whole issue with how he genetically altered the genes inside of it.
Okay. So you're narrowing it down to people? To humans?
I guess.
Is it the twins?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a really good topic. Like, notice how I phrase it. You want to narrow it down to like, is this people or farm animals or whatever. If you try to do just gene editing, that would be so broad that you would exceed the maximum pages pretty quickly. So, and that might be one if somebody says, wow, is it okay to do that with farm animals? Well, that's another topic that somebody else might find interesting. What else do we have? Anybody at home want to pitch an idea?
Personally, I'm kind of stuck between kind of talking about stem cell research and also like the modifying of like the genes to make like the perfect kid or whatnot, but I'm not set on anything yet.
Okay, so an idea about the fun term for that is designer babies.
A historical one I thought of was like the discovery of the structure of DNA.
The discovery of the structure of DNA. And who really discovered that? Rosalind Franklin. Very good. Okay. Notice that the people who got the Nobel Prize for it, Watson and Crick, were not the same people who discovered it. Still bothers me. Rosalind Franklin was an inorganic chemist. Guess what I'm doing my PhD in? Inorganic chemistry. What do I do on a regular basis? X-ray diffractometry. That's what she did. They dissed my field. Okay. Yeah, that one actually would be really good. I've never had anybody do that for this class. But that's a really good topic. Okay, so if you haven't pitched an idea right now and you're still like brewing or thinking about what could you do, that's fine. If you're one of the people who is going into education and you have an idea, of a topic, well, let me throw a little bit more about that out there. I am going to ask you to choose a disciplinary core idea that you would teach on. And I'm going to ask you to provide enough background that a other teacher who had never taken a course in that would then understand enough to be able to teach it, and then put the lesson plan together. And I will judge it based on, did you give the scientific background? Have you fully determined what all parts of the standards, including cross-cutting concepts and science and engineering practices? And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, you will by the time you write this. And then I will analyze how well I think that lesson can be taught. And your presentation is going to be a little different. I have some details about that I'll share later. But if you're interested in doing that, and I will also deal with the appropriateness of whatever grade level you choose to teach, because that's also going to be specific. All right. So notice that the paper is like 25% of your grade. I am going to break that up a little bit, and you are going to have, as you go through, you will have a proposal, which is going to get a grade. You are going to have, at one point, I'm going to expect a bibliography. And the reason I want the bibliography before I want the paper is I want to know that you have done enough research before that. Now, I'm not saying that in between submitting your bibliography and submitting your rough draft that you can't add things to it. But I want to see a bibliography, and I want to be able to look at it, and I will want to be able to find credible sources there. I expect at least 2 peer-reviewed sources. Yes, we'll talk about what that means later. Okay. And if you're doing the lesson plan, yes, you still need to have sources, because I really doubt, let's see, I had somebody who did one on biomes, and that person did not have the scientific background to sit down and write biomes. They had to look stuff up. Fine, you look stuff up. What do you do when you look stuff up? Cite it. Okay, that's the type of thing. So there will be a big bibliography even if you do the alternative project. Okay. All right. Other topics going once, twice? Okay, I put the requirements for the paper and the alternative paper on Canvas on the front page, so you can go to those and look at those, read through that on your own. I reserve the right to edit that because I did that for this summer's class, and I did it fairly quickly, and I'm fairly confident I have at least 1 or 2 typos in there, which I plan on fixing. And I'm not sure if somebody asks me a question, I may put a clarification on that as well. Okay. I do want to talk about the Scopes monkey trial for a little bit. Why was that so controversial? I'm going to pick on. Why was that so controversial? What do you think, Steve?
It had, in a way, it divided, at that moment, it divided religion from education, public education, and the closing of the trial allowed it to be brought into the classroom.
Is that all it was between? Does religion belong in our public education? Okay, Scopes monkey trial. Why is it called a monkey trial? What does monkey have to do with evolution?
Evolutionists believe that we came from monkeys.
Why? Why do people think we came from monkeys? Because that's actually not what evolution teaches.
They don't really understand.
Because we share so much genetic similarities as primates.
We have a common ancestor, but we don't, like, we didn't evolve from.
Right. So our modern view is if you look at the family tree, here's a common ancestor. It's probably not that simple to break off, but you get the idea that it's not we came from monkeys, there's some common ancestor and we both developed from that. This is a really rough description of it. But there's another major impact of the Scopes monkey trial that you're probably all missing. There is a rather famous depiction of evolution, and it starts with monkeys, and you have a series of beings until you get to people. Why was that such a controversial thing?
Because that didn't go directly with the Bible and the creation story.
Yes. So that's one of the reasons. There's another major reason. Let's see if I can find this quickly or not. I wasn't planning on talking about this today, but I think it's too important to do this. Come on, just bring it up. Just want the image to show up. Oh, okay. And for people at home, maybe. Okay. This is the image associated with this Scopes monkey trial. Okay. So there were people who said, no, this is not what we should be teaching in our schools. And there were another group of people who said that science says that we have this evolutionary process and we really need to teach that. And we need to stick with teaching just what science says. And we need to keep this completely away from public education. But there's another issue with this that I hope you can all see, or at least understand there is a historical context to this. What's the other issue that this has?
Is it that it's supposed to happen over a very extended period of time, and there's no way to really measure that within just a few years, because it would have had to happen over centuries of evolution?
How is that related to what's going on in the world today?
Everything's very rushed.
Yeah, even though that's true. This was used. There are people who said, here's white people, here's black people. I wish I was kidding. This was used to justify racism. So when people talk about the Scopes monkey trial, one of the groups of people that was very involved in it is like, no, we need to teach that all people have value. And that needs to be way more important than something that we don't completely understand that can give us wrong ideas. And if you don't believe that there is any systemic racism remaining, realize that our whole focus on just keeping religion out of publication, I can't talk today, keeping religion out of public education allowed people to say, well, I can use this. I can use eugenics and say, we just need more of the right people. And in the early 1900s, this was very prominent. And because they succeeded in supporting science and saying we just need to teach religion in there, we shouldn't be teaching, we shouldn't be teaching religion in education. We should only be teaching science. They allowed a lot of systemic racism to continue. So the Scopes monkey trial, everybody looks at it just religion versus science without looking at the other aspects that this had on society. There are people who are fighting to keep evolution out of the classrooms because they were afraid of what it was going to do to a group of people. And if we look historically and say, there are people who are anti-science, and that's why they were fighting for this, it was just because of the Bible. Well, realize the people who are following the Bible or who are the ones who are saying that all men equal. And now all people are equal. We are so quick to look back at history and judge based on a certain view. And if you realize the people on this side, there were a significant number of them who were fighting for the dignity of the human person. And they lost that argument in court. Now, rightly decided, yes, the teaching of evolution shouldn't be kept out of our schools, but this is not what we should be teaching. And that is, even at that time, what people thought of teaching evolution was. Now, this is 100 years ago. So this is not when you hear about the unrest and everything, I will say different things about the form of the protest, but the meat of it, the fact that we don't think about how evolution was used, a accurate scientific theory, not 100% accurate. Actually, I should call it theories because it's not really one, was used. Okay. Science is a process by which we learn things. Science is not this all-knowing body of knowledge that we refer to in order to justify what we want to do. And in this case, there are a lot of people who use science to justify continuing a systemic racism that, if you look in the early 1900s, is impossible to deny. That's my 2 cents on the Scopes monkey trial. And everybody focuses on just the clash between religion and education and whether we should keep religion out of education. When in fact, and maybe not a particular religion, but have we taken so much of the religion, what religion gives us, out of education, that we have removed the true dignity of the human person from our teaching? That's my 2 cents worth. What are you guys' thoughts? And just so I know, has anybody ever heard this analysis of the monkey Scopes trial before? Why not?
Because it's not what they want us to hear.
It's probably not something that should be taught in grade school, but maybe at some point in our educational career, we need to analyze what decisions like this have on a society. My 2 cents worth. Fortunately, you get to see it before you graduate and analyze and see, oh, there is some more of it. What else any other thoughts on this?
I've always had a problem with evolution just because even though it happened over a period of millions of years, you don't continue to see animals evolving.
We don't?
I don't. We don't continue to see animals in different stages of evolution and like that.
That's wrong, by the way.
And that was my biggest problem with it.
Scientifically, that's not a correct snapshot.
No. But you don't see apes in different stages of currently in different stages of evolution. Unless you want to count like Bigfoot.
What about bacteria?
Well, that too, but
Wait a minute. Now, here's the problem. Are viruses alive or not? Where's my biology majors? Are they alive or not?
Technically, no, but they have some like life.
Do they evolve?
Yes.
mutate.
So the coronavirus is an example of evolution. It actually is. That's truly understood by a scientist, yes.
So mutation is considered evolution.
No, mutation is a source of evolution. So a mutation in which you have a surviving body or group of organisms that maintain those characteristics that are now, let's see, correct me biology people, but they're now reproductively isolated from the other group. That's now a new species. And we actually see that. Now it happens way faster on a microscopic scale than it does on a macroscopic scale. But you know, we've seen mass extinctions in the past, and after mass extinctions, then you tend to see new organisms. And it's entirely possible we are seeing new organisms coming out now.
So basically evolution is kind of like the evolution that we experienced even as human beings over the course of centuries would be almost a form of adaptation to the changes in the world around us instead of...
Well, those are changes within a species. Because if you go back 1,000 years, we are not reproductively isolated. We're still the same species.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that's different. Okay? And, you know, there's no, we talk about a lot. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think when you look at like evolution on a microscopic scale, I think that you have a little bit more of an appreciation for the science that it gives you. Because I know, like, until I took microbiology and really saw, you know, the evolution, you know, of the vaccines and of bacteria and different things like that, and how those things can affect larger things and cause triggers and chain reactions. I think it's a little bit harder to understand. Because most people, when they think about evolution, they think about it, you know, like this, and like huge ideology, instead of looking at it as a building block, like something has to start from, you know, a small space and get to a big space versus starting at a big space.
Yes. I don't know, could you guys at home hear that? Okay. Yeah.
Doesn't the church teach that it's okay to believe evolution? There's nothing wrong in believing evolution.
That's too big of a statement. Okay. So believing in a scientific evolutionary process is okay. Now, there are issues with that when we start ascribing, and I'll talk about this another day, but when we start ascribing things to science that science has no bearing on. So believing in evolution, remember the other day when I talked about the difference between a law and a theory and whatever? Evolution is a theory. It helps us to explain how things happen. And we have a lot of evidence for this theory of evolution, but it is a theory that explains how things happen. It does not explain the value of people. Evolution-wise, we cannot explain the difference between an animal and a human. It doesn't give us that. And as a matter of fact, scientifically, you have a lot of hypotheses out there. But is there a real theory that's credible that explains why people can think and monkeys don't have the same process for reason? So according to the church, man is distinct from animal because of something above and beyond the physical world. And there are people who believe in evolution to think we're just a different form of animal. And that's different. And that belief leads to this kind of thing where I can justify a lot of things with science. I'm going to pull that off the screen because it just bothers me. Just bothers me. So the other thing that we see from this is what is projected as the science and what the science is don't always match. I'm going to come back to your mask question that you're talking about. How much evidence can you find on Facebook for masks?
Valid evidence? Not a lot.
What's that?
A lot of opinions, yeah, not necessarily evidence.
You can find lots of evidence on Facebook. You can find people doing all kinds of different experiments and showing what they've done. You can find all kinds of things. So why don't we just use Facebook to figure out this?
Because not everyone who's doing these experiments is scientifically trained, is properly trained to perform these experiments. So there's always there's a greater chance of error in those experiments.
Yeah, I'm going to throw something else out there too. Very few of the experiments done are set up to account for variables, okay? And even fewer of those are set up to truly determine the effectiveness beforehand. Almost all of them are designed to show what somebody already believes. Now, if you believe something, if you think masks are effective, you can design an experiment that will legitimately determine whether masks are effective, even if you have a preconceived notion of it. But the ones you see on Facebook do not fit that criteria. So we have a discussion going on in this country today about masks or no masks. And we have another discussion going on in this country about the value of people. We have another discussion going on in this country about whether or not some people are being treated unfairly. All of these are very important. And the question of, does science have something to say about these? I know I'm going to go the wrong question. If we look at science that has been done in the past, notice science is something you do. If we look at science that has been done in the past, does that have an effect on our discussions today? Yes. So for those who are saying, well, there's no real systemic racism, there's still evidences of that eugenic idea going on in our country today. It's there. Now, is it systemic? What is systemic? What's a good definition of systemic? Okay, this is why we have trouble with that. No, nobody can come up with a real definition of systemic off the top of their head. So is our system itself designed to have this racism, or is it the people that are in the system that perpetuate racism? I am going to assert that our founding fathers, in spite of all of their flaws and errors and how wrong they were, created a system that can defeat all of that. Just going to take time. So our Declaration of Independence, unfortunately, the founding fathers didn't completely follow it. And our Constitution, even though it wasn't completely followed, were vehicles that were to defeat all those forms.
We wanted the people to come after them to be better than them. You know, they wanted us to learn from their mistakes.
So I'm going to ask you to do two things. First of all, don't dismiss people when they say, yeah, there's racism in the system. It's there. I think it's with the people and not the system itself. So I don't like the term systemic racism, although there are places where it has been put into laws and it's there. It shouldn't be, that should be taken care of. The other thing is, when you're looking at events of the past, like the Scopes monkey trial, we talk so much about religion and public education and the clash between whether religion should be in schools. We forget that some of the people on the side of a religion were fighting some very horrendous battles that didn't make the news. They were fighting for the dignity of people. And they felt that was far more important than putting a scientific teaching in there that could justify what people were doing. So be less swift to judge people in the past. Especially as you're doing your research on this. Yes, you want to look at your ideas and everything, but don't judge so harshly what people were doing. Look at what their intentions were. Why did they do this? And you may not have that evidence there, but I'm going to ask you to do that. All right. For this week, there's a couple of things that I want you to do. I am going to post a reading from Newman's Idea of the University up on Canvas later today. I'm going to ask you to read through that. It's only a couple pages. Okay, so I could have asked you to read huge amounts of it. I'm going to ask you to read a couple pages before Wednesday, and let's be prepared to talk about that in the class.